Welcome everyone back to the arena with me, Matt, your host, and your co-host, MD. We have a guest with us today. As you may have seen, we've been doing a lot of solo episodes, but this guest in particular, caught my eye, and that is Katarina Polonska. I hope I pronounced that last name right. If
You're
I
good.
didn't,
Yeah, yeah.
that's what we're running with today.
No, you're
Um,
good. You're good.
Katarina has the credentials are quite extensive. I'll just say that. She's got a master in gender dynamics from University of Oxford. She's a relationship coach, entrepreneur, a bunch of different certifications. She's an ICF accredited coach, and she's successfully transformed hundreds of lives. And so, Katarina, thank you so much, first and foremost, for being on the podcast, for spending some time with us and hopping in the arena, if you will. Why don't we start off with this? Who is Katarina? I was going to say your full name, but I wasn't sure if I pronounced it right.
Yeah,
Normally I say the full
you're
name.
good.
So I'm
You're
just going
good.
to, who is Katarina?
Oh, great question. Who is she and who is she becoming? Definitely the state of evolution. So, I mean, you described it so well, right? I work in the realm of relationships and I specialize in looking at men and women and how we interact with each other, which is really actually what got me on the road of becoming becoming a relationship person, I guess. I hate the term expert, but like working in this world. And it was really a series of personal events that led me here, coupled with academic interests, coupled with professional work. And now when I look back at my life, it seems so inevitable that I would end up here. It's actually almost kind of classic Freudian, it's kind of funny when I look at like the people I work with and the work that I do and the story that led me here. But yeah, I mean, I live in Vancouver in Canada, which never thought I'd live here, but I married a Canadian, so here I am. And I love the nature. I love my work so deeply. I feel so lucky to be able to work with men, with women, with couples. And I love talking about relationships, as weird as that is. I love the gnarly, the challenging, the difficult topics. I love unpacking it and pulling it apart and really analyzing it. And I foster kittens, as you know by now. I've got a kitten chewing on my foot as we speak.
And so you mentioned, well, there's a couple places. One, you mentioned you're in a state of evolution. So I'd love to
Yeah.
go there at some point. But two, you mentioned a series of events that led you to kind of walk this path. Like, are there any particular moments that stand out as kind of, some people say rock bottom, or these like
Mm.
moments where, you really like made some sort of change that kind of stick with you, or that came up when I shared that?
Yeah. I was talking to my husband about it last night. There's a couple of moments, a couple of intervals in my life where the journey again that unfolded afterwards seems almost inevitable. The first of those is, I guess, actually being an immigrant, right? I was born in Eastern Europe, came to England when I was 5 years old. A lot of immigrants listening to this will understand when I say there's a real personal growth mentality that comes with that. This mentality of we got to make it work, we got to succeed, we're gonna have to climb that ladder, we're gonna have to prove, that we can do this. And so everyone in my family was really pummeled with this idea of like we've got to be high performing and we've got to, do our best. And so I was lucky in that sense that I got to have a great education. My parents consciously moved and put me into this amazing school where Amal Clooney and, like really great people went. And it was a free school. It was kind of just a British state school. But, and then I got to go to Oxford. I got a great undergraduate degree and they really set me up for success there. But it also fueled me with this high performing mindset that actually came back to bite me. And I see that consistently with my clients that when you are told that, nothing you ever do is really ever good enough because actually you can always do better. And even if you get an A star, you can always do better. There's always room for improvement. It does instill this very specific wiring inside of an individual, inside of me, inside of the people I work with, that actually can become a bit of a detriment to your overall success in life. So that's one piece of it. That piece fueled a personal challenge with anorexia in my teenage years. Went to a girls' school, go figure. There was a lot of high performing girls there who had eating disorders. And that was very normal back then. I mean, the 90s didn't have a great image for women, right? Like the kind of the skinny Kate Moss look. And that journey with anorexia and insomnia coupled with that, which is just a great, great bonus to add to the mental suffering. But that journey is actually what really got me started on discovering therapy, discovering counseling, discovering personal development. I knew about it before. My dad is in the world of personal development himself, but I used to really shun it. We rebel against our parents often. And my dad was quoting Tony Robbins to me from the age of 14. And I was like, God, shut up. Like, I don't care. I don't care about awakening the giant within. Shut up. But when I was 16, 17, and I had anorexia, and my parents don't believe in therapy because, hello, migrant family, they told me, rather than paying for therapy because what is this quackery, we'll actually pay for you to get qualifications to pull yourself out of this mess. So they paid for me to become a coach and put me through my coaching certifications and hypnotherapy and all these brilliant tools, really as a vehicle to get me to, add a little star and qualification to my name, but also actually do the work. So that, I went out of school when I was 18, 17 rather. I went out of school for a month, did this big month-long immersion. And that was the second big moment where I gained this qualification. I was like, oh my goodness, this is how the subconscious mind works. This is why I'm in this state. This is how I actually get myself out of insomnia. This is incredible. And I almost didn't go to university. I actually started my first coaching business when I was 17 and really didn't want to go into academia. I really actually wanted to just build a business and help all these people. But I did end up going to university. And so then the third big moment was when I was leaving university. I was actually already working for a very entrepreneurial company. My dad revealed that he was leaving my mother. And that was completely out of the blue. It was completely very much a situation of let's wait till the kids are older. We're going to wait till they're, at least 18 where they can handle it. And then he's going to leave. And on the one hand, I understand the logic and the rationale. On the other hand, it was this huge, it was kind of like my world imploding for the first time because it imploded again later. And in many ways, it confirmed what I had already suspected throughout my teenage years, that there was something wrong, that there was something a little bit off in my parents' marriage. The fact that he lived abroad and they did this long distance thing, there was something a little bit off there. That whole dad living abroad, coming home for the weekends, very McKinsey consultant lifestyle actually fueled a lot of my anorexia, abandonment wounds, hello, kind of classic case study. And when he left, again, whilst I understand the rationale, I was an adult. And so what actually happened then was being old enough to see, oh, this is what divorce is. This is what a divorce lawyer is. Oh, the divorce lawyer is going to make them kill each other. He's going to make dad take mom's pension and mom takes dad's money and they're going to be fighting forever. And so being the responsible, high-performing one of the family, I was like, well, maybe I can mediate it. And so I actually ended up being in the middle of both my parents trying to navigate this by email, which was inevitably very hard, right? And so I had a bit of a nervous breakdown actually when I was 22. At this point, I was living in Spain. I had my first business, I guess second business. It was a wine company. And I had a meltdown, which then led me to going deeper on my personal development path, started doing retreats, started really trying to understand abandonment wounds, started trying to understand, what does this mean for me if, I have this history of anorexia and now my dad has left and all my worst nightmares have come true and he's actually abandoned us. And so really, again, it began that journey. And then the final moment where this all came together was later in life in my early 30s. At this point, I'm like, I'm good. I've been in therapy for over 15 years. I've done so many retreats. I've done psychedelics. I read all the books. I know all the theory. I'm like, I'm good. I'm quote unquote healed, and I know all this stuff. And then I'm engaged. And when I'm engaged and there's a wedding looming ahead, I start to fall apart. All of this anxiety starts to come up within me that I didn't even know I had. All of these doubts, all of this uncertainty. I start thinking am I a commitment phobe? Is there something wrong with me? Am I rejecting healthy love? I'm anxiously attached. What is this? And in the end, the engagement ended actually in infidelity, and I ended up calling the engagement off. And it was devastating. It was like my world imploding again, because at this point I couldn't understand what the heck had happened. Here I am working in behavioral science at this point. I've got all the tools available to me, and I'm having to start my life over again, where I thought I was going to be entering this little white picket fence life where I have kids and, and I'm a wife and a mother. And instead I'm like, what? I'm back in the wilderness on my own. I'm single. This is terrible. And that was the moment where I thought, okay, I need to really take this seriously, because how can it be that someone who has all the theory, knows all this stuff, understands, I can actually understand what happened here. And yet I'm still here. What is going on? And that's when I realized there's this difference between knowing it intellectually, like a lot of my clients do, and really embodying it and really going through the fire of it all. And so I spent this 11-month window where I went so deep into the fire of actually embodying and practicing and living all those tools that I knew. And kind of like the, icing on the cake, I met my husband at the end of it. And he was also very much into this embodiment piece of embodying the learning. And we both quit our corporate jobs, moved to Ibiza, where I had actually had a company before. And I started for a hobby coaching my friends, coaching my peers. I gained the qualifications because I'm a qualification nerd. And before I knew it, I realized that a lot of people were really struggling with relationships, a lot of high performers, a lot of really intelligent people who, again, know about attachment therapy, know about love languages, which have been discredited, but, know about all these theories, but are really struggling, whether they're single or whether they are in a relationship, whether they're divorced. And that got me thinking that this isn't a problem in isolation. And the more that I studied it, I'm a social scientist really by nature, the more I realized this is a bit of a gap, right? Like the typical modalities of therapy, counseling kind of miss the boat of what it means to be someone who's a busy executive who's been forced into this very successful lifestyle. But this one key arena is really missing, the
Well,
relational side of things.
let me ask you something that kind of jumped out to me as you were
Yeah.
sharing. I feel like there's a lot of us that want to, quote unquote, maybe people listening that want to embody, like we know
Yes.
up here, and we want to quote unquote embody this and go into the fire, or whatever the metaphor you use. But like, what does that practically look like? How do people actually take the steps to do that?
Yeah.
Like, I
Great
feel like there's a lot of
question.
people, especially men, that are like, I want to feel my feelings, but I don't know how to feel my feelings. How do I know what I'm feeling? How do I know if I'm actually feeling something? Like,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of misconception and confusion around that.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I actually had a client, an extremely high performing lawyer client, come visit me for a private retreat this weekend. And we were talking about exactly this. He's a really smart guy. He understands it all very well. He can describe the dynamics, everything that's happening. The difference between knowing it intellectually and knowing that, oh, okay, I'm feeling I'll use the abandonment wound as a classic one. I'm feeling a little bit abandoned. I'm feeling a little bit lonely. I'm feeling a little bit rejected. And I know what's going on. The difference between knowing it and actually sitting in silence, locating where am I feeling this feeling inside of my body. If I was to describe what an abandonment wound even feels like, how would I describe it? How do I even know that there is something called a quote unquote abandonment wound happening right now? What is the feeling in my stomach? Is it actually, or in my body rather, is it a feeling in my stomach? Is it a feeling in my chest? Is it a feeling in my neck? If I was to describe the feeling, what is the feeling? What is the sensation? What's actually happening? Is it that there's a feeling happening and then my mind is interpreting the feeling and telling me a story that this person over here is actually not interested in me and, they're abandoned me or whatever it might be? What's the story? And how is that story feeding that feeling? And what is that cycle that's happening? And can I actually just sit with the feeling and witness it and witness this pattern playing out in real time and get really intimate and really familiar with it and meet it? And when I say meet it, what I mean is really using your conscious awareness from a mindfulness perspective, like really bringing that conscious awareness to the pattern, to the feelings, to the embodied experience and meeting it, holding space for it, getting to know it, befriending it. There's a difference between that, which does bring potentially uncomfortable feelings, because it's like you're opening the door on the sensation and you're saying, hey, welcome in. Hi, let me get to know you. Let me have you wash over me. Let me actually know how you feel. There's a difference between that and intellectualizing it. And what I find is that a lot of very high performing people, in order to be high performing, have had to necessarily repress and suppress their unpleasant feelings in a bid to put it aside and get on with it. You're tired? Doesn't matter. Put it aside, crack on, do your 12-hour shift, right? Like you feel scared? Doesn't matter. Put it aside, just go do it. And so we have this very strong muscle of overriding our needs, of overriding our urges, of not going to the toilet if you need the toilet because actually you need to power through another Zoom call, and just powering through and powering through and really shutting the body down to the extent that actually we don't build that muscle of getting comfortable with noticing, what is my body communicating to me? What old stories live inside of my body that are coming up that I actually need to go inward and witness? And those stories might be really old and they might not be very comfortable, but that's where the real growth is, right? It's this kind of symbiotic relationship between understanding it, because understanding is important, and also, I mean, not to be cliche, but processing it, right? What is processing? Processing is being with it, it's witnessing it, it's allowing it to move through you, because all energy wants to move. And so it has to move through you. And that's the piece where, yeah, it's maybe scary, it's maybe challenging. As a culture, we haven't really been trained into doing this. We're a very avoidant society, Anglo-American society. Right? It's very avoidant. If you look outside and you go live your life, it doesn't really feed the message of, sit with your discomfort. It's like, no, take a pill, go buy something, go outside, go on TikTok, go have a drink, go whatever, go
So
meditate, right? And
I
even
guess
that's not yet done right.
my question there then is, and maybe I hope I understood this correctly,
Mhm.
but the initial attempt after the engagement, calling off the marriage,
Yeah.
was that fear driven through fear of abandonment, like fearing like if I commit to this, I may be abandoned? Was that like, maybe that's reductive or too simplistic, but
Mm.
is that what what the root cause was?
In terms of why I called it off?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I called it off because of some actual like structural pieces between the relationship, and me and him fundamentally weren't compatible, right? Like there's very different values and a very different setup. The bigger part of it is that I would argue, because of that fear of abandonment, and because I had been conditioned so much into this little high performing show pony mindset that gotta be married by 35. I mean, even that's quite old, right? Gotta be married in my early 30s, gotta have kids by 35, gotta have made it. That I think there was a part of me in my late 20s where I knew I gotta settle, I gotta find someone, gotta get the show on the road, right? Like I'm already quite old. And that's what I thought. And so I found a guy who was, good enough, and we had a great initial dynamic, and I was almost kind of moving the relationship along with this vision of what life could look like together. And it was a beautiful vision. It was a really wonderful vision. And at the same time, so much of that vision was fueled by fear of, well, I don't want to be alone. I want to get this done, right? I want to have the wedding. I want to have the kids and blah, 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 blah. What's really interesting is when I met my husband, all of that attachment to these societal ideals and this idea of fearing being alone, fearing of dying alone, had left me. Because actually, what happened when I called up that engagement was I made my peace with, maybe I am just going to be someone who dies alone. Okay, probably won't have kids, because how is this going to work timeline wise if I'm now 32 and I have to start from scratch? So let's say I give myself a year to grieve, then I have to go find some. I did the math, and I was like, this is actually potentially not going to work for me. So I might have to let it go. And confronting the egoic idea of what it meant to be a quote unquote, again, successful female, and recognize that, yeah, maybe I'm going to be one of those women who just, I don't know, has cats and drinks wine and works, you know?
Well,
And the
so
more I'm,
um,
sorry, go on.
well, I guess because something that jumped out to me
Yeah.
was, now that you're married and you also, it seems like, had to come to this rubber meets the road moment of like,
Mm,
maybe this is just my reality before getting married, right? Like I'm hearing two different ways that we overcame the fear of abandonment. It was,
mhm,
number one was, this might just be my reality, and so like
mhm,
survival instinct is going to kick in, I'm going to overcome this. And then number two, it's, I got married, I'm not going to be abandoned, right? For
mm.
me, though, when I have overcome fears, I think overcome sounds a little too finite, as if it will never bubble back up. And I'm just curious, like at this stage in your life, do you notice any of that still bubble up? Do you still have to do work on those sorts of fears?
Mm. That's a great question. And just to go back to your point about overcoming the fears, I always say that we have to work on things on two levels, right? You have to work on things on the deeper level, on that subconscious level of really, again, meeting that old fear, meeting that old wound, that old pattern, allowing it to be processed, allowing it to move through you and to be upgraded into your present reality. It's a childhood pattern, right? We have to bring it to the present. And also working on that more surface level structural piece of, okay, well, if I am going to be alone, if I am going to die alone, what is that going to look like? How can I actually make the best of that situation? And honestly, it got to this point before I met my husband. I was like, I think I'll be okay with it. I actually think I can have an amazing life. I think I can actually have a lot of fun and have a really great existence that I'll be proud of and happy with. And it was in that space that I met him. You asked me if these pieces come up now. They come up in different ways. You know, you've heard this analogy of the onion layer where you do your personal growth and you peel off one layer and then you have another layer and you keep peeling, peeling. I personally don't believe that I will ever stop doing personal development. I just don't. I love going deeper and deeper and deeper into the kernel of the truth. And I feel like every time I do some growth, I uncover another layer. And whilst my relationship is phenomenal, I've not been married for 35 years, right? So I don't know what's going to come up in the future. I'm confident that there'll be more pieces that will have to come up that I'll have to process. I'm confident that when my parents are still alive, I'm confident that when they pass, more things are going to come up to the surface, right? These pieces of life are going to be emerging as we are ready to handle them, as we peel away more of these layers. And I will say, starting a business was also one of the most confronting things I've ever done. And you both probably know that it was, you know, starting a business is like starting another whole relationship. It's like starting another marriage. And you're kind of going in like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And all of your fears and anxieties and insecurities come up again to be processed. So yes, the stuff comes up still in different ways with different qualities. The difference now is that I don't fear it at all. I just see it as part of being human and I embrace it and I welcome it. And I've actually learned to, in a kind of weird masochistic way, enjoy my triggers. Because every single trigger I know is just another opportunity to go a little bit deeper, right? It's another opportunity to actually look at something new and be like, oh, interesting. Why is that triggering me?
Yeah, so I think sometimes, you know, it kind of reminded me of you know, I used to suffer from most of my life mentally in my head, and so now
Mhm.
I feel like I've got a lot of clarity, and I've like you
Mhm.
said, I think to be healed is to know you'll never like be fully healed. You know, like
Yes.
there's always opportunities and there's new layers, like you said. But I think I find myself sometimes like I've lived that life of suffering, and so anytime I feel like frustrated or disappointed, I kind of pull myself. I'm like, yeah, but you're like you're living a life you once dreamed of, and I can kind of pull myself
Yeah.
out of it. And I think sometimes it's about like just allowing ourselves to have that, like fully experience whatever it is, um, and then process, like, you know, bring yourself back to gratitude, whatever it might be. But it just kind of reminded me when you say you almost enjoy your triggers. Um, it kind of reminded me of that. I'm curious, like, what is your journey? You know, that you're comfortable sharing with your parents been? You know, I feel like a lot.
Mm.
You mentioned like a lot of high performing, high achieving qualities that I think, you know, it sounds like were in large part, or at least partly shaped by your upbringing and your experience. Like, how have you navigated that journey that I think a lot of people struggle with, where you know, my parents did this to me or they made me this way, and you know, there's anger, you know, whatever it might be. Like, how has that journey been for you?
Yeah. Great question. And there's a few little pieces here I want to touch upon. Piece number one, and I actually landed on this conclusion deep in a psychedelic trip. It's recognizing that actually, in order to be human, we have to suffer, right? I actually hold a very kind of Buddhist philosophy at the core of my, I guess, beliefs. In order to be human, we have to suffer because there's a separation, right? And so when we are growing up, when we are developing as children, we develop egos. The ego is inherently suffering. Our parents also have egos. They're also suffering. They're doing the best that they can. They're not going to do a perfect job. They're not, you know, they're not infallible beings. And so everybody is doing the best that they can as a human. And to be human is to be inherently suffering and to be inherently flawed. Again, we have egos, but we're different to, you know, the little kitten running around right now, who to me is so pure and so innocent and just a little bundle of love and joy. Humans are different, right? And it's partly what makes us so brilliant as humans and have such like vivid personalities. And it's nothing to be afraid of, but it does mean that there's going to be suffering within it. And so when I realized that actually every single human being on the planet has suffering, every single parent on the planet has suffering, and every single parent on the planet has instilled more suffering into their children, because that's just how humans are created. It's how egos are developed. That helped me make my peace. The other piece of it is recognizing that we can all be guilty, but not to blame. So we, as again, humans, in order to develop, we develop patterns, we develop behaviors. These are in response to often pain or pleasure, right? And so a lot of this pain is just, again, part of our conditioning, part of our life. Our parents can be guilty for instilling it upon us, but they're not to blame in the sense that they didn't necessarily know what they were doing. Not in all cases. Absolutely, there are abusive parents out there who meant to harm a child. But I would even argue that those people are not fully conscious. And again, if we were to strip away their pain, I doubt that they would want to hurt anyone, right? So there's this idea that all of this suffering, we're kind of not to blame for it. Like, you can be guilty for it, but, and if I look at my own parents, my parents are high-performing people. That's not their fault. They were conditioned into that themselves. My dad was living abroad, working like a lunatic, trying to make money to provide for our family. It created an abandonment wound in me, but is that his fault? No, he was doing the best that he could. He came from Soviet Russia, where you didn't have the freedom to make a ton of money. Suddenly he's in a capitalist Western economy. He has all this unfettered freedom to go and make as much money as he can. Of course he's going to take it, right? Like, the messaging for him is, this is how I provide. He didn't realize that a little girl doesn't need money, right? But then again, that being said, I grew up in a decent middle-class household, so I'm very lucky. Same thing with my mother. Her discipline was very different to the discipline that I know now. So it's kind of like they can be guilty, but not to blame. And holding blame towards them doesn't really help anyone. So the forgiveness piece was huge for me, really huge, to recognize that they were doing the best that they can. And I'll never forget, I did a retreat all about healing parental wounds. It's called the Hoffman process. Really fantastic retreat. I recommend it. And at the end of it, we were all sitting there feeling so enlightened and thinking, we're going to be the best parents ever. We're not going to screw up our kids. And they all laughed and said, you think we don't screw up our kids? The teachers. We screw up our kids in a different way. We're that annoying personal growth, new age hippie parent that they hate and rebel against, right? You're going to screw them up either way. So the forgiveness piece is huge. But I will say the present piece that I've been working with and has helped me so much in the recent years is becoming really good at boundaries. Really good at boundaries. And I have yet to meet a single person outside of my own coach who genuinely has really good boundaries. I think we all struggle with boundaries because deep down, none of us want to be rejected. And deep down, a lot of us have abandonment wounds in different forms to different degrees. And actually, with parents, when we can learn that we will never save our parents, no matter how much we love them, on that subconscious, deep level, we cannot actually help them. We cannot actually save them. We gotta let them go. And they may well let us go. And they should. We learn to set boundaries. And those boundaries might be, I'm not gonna come and spend Easter with you. Because actually, when I spend Easter with you, it's a net negative. I end up being really stressed. I have to do everything, blah, 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 blah. I'll see you in a couple of weeks after Easter, whatever it might be, right? So learning to set the boundaries so that the relationship with your parents comes from a place of joy and choice and pleasure and freedom, as opposed to obligation and guilt and shame. And I got to do this. And I'm worried about them. That's where the real freedom to have a sovereign adult-to-adult relationship is. And that's what I found my peace with my parents, really building this adult-to-adult dynamic of, we're both sovereign beings here, and I'm not responsible for your emotions, you're not responsible for mine. And I want to show up as clean and as loving and as free with you so that we can have a good relationship, as opposed to one fueled by this kind of infantile, obligation and need and guilt and shame. And then it becomes a net negative on the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Feels like you're speaking to me. Because it's so relevant to where the stage of life I'll be 31 in May, right? And like,
Mhm.
I've gone through this pathway of finding forgiveness towards my parents,
Mhm.
for the things that, like you said, they're guilty of, but maybe not to blame.
Mhm.
Granted, I maybe went about it with a little bit of anger expression and perhaps made them feel to blame. And then when
Mm.
they felt
Mhm.
blamed and guilty themselves, then I felt guilty for doing that to them. It was just this. I don't think I went about it the best way, but I went about it the way that, the tools that I had at my disposal.
Yeah.
I guess to that other piece, though, you mentioned the Easter example because I vividly remember like there were times where later in my 20s, let's say, when I was home with them, I just felt like anxious to get out of there. Like I
Mm.
wanted to leave. I
Mhm.
didn't want to be around them. I felt stressed by just anything that they were doing. And so much of it just started to bubble up. And then the moment I would leave, I would feel guilty for not being with them and
Mhm.
not spending time with them. And, obviously these are precious years and whatnot. For me though, it's not just Easter. It's like you said, you can't save them. You certainly can't change who they are.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I find that time spent with them often is not in that zone of joy, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to reconcile like how do I still see them and be with
Mm.
them as
Mm.
to not avoid them. Um, and it sometimes feels like there has to be some sort of concession or trade-off that I have to
Mm.
make with my own boundaries. And so because I've understood the boundary piece, I just haven't agreed with it or it hasn't worked well for me because what it has led to is just general avoidance and general
Mhm.
distance. And so curious how you would help somebody reconcile that piece.
Yeah, such a great point, and I hear everything you're saying. I mean, it makes complete sense, and it's something I was navigating about a year ago, actually, this very same question. The question I would have for you, and something for you to mull over, is what would it take to have a encounter, a relationship, a gathering, a meeting with my mother or my father or my parents that genuinely feels joyful, and strip away everything else. And I'll give you an example of what this looked like for me, and I'm actually going to be doing it in about a month and a half. My pattern is that my mother lives in England, and my father lives in Ukraine, and I live in Canada, so I'm far away from a 10-hour flight. Every year, I will fly back to London. From London, I will hop on a bus or get a taxi, which will cost me an arm and a leg, to go 3.5 hours up north to where my mother lives. And then I'll get on a tiny other little bus and I'll schlep across the country another hour. And then I'll go to her house. And my mother lives alone since the divorce. And she has a lovely home, but she's used to living alone, right? She has her routine, she has her work, she loves it. She's got her TV, her sitcoms, blah, blah, blah. And so when I come there, I will stay for a week or 10 days because, like a good daughter, I want to spend quality time. And then what happens there is that I spend this time there. She obviously cooks a nice meal and stuff. The first 2 days are genuinely nice, it's like reconnecting. But then I've got work to do. I'm an entrepreneur. So then I'm working from her kitchen because there's no office. So I'm there in the kitchen. She comes home from work. She sees me, working at my desk or having a client call. She then feels like I'm imposing in her kitchen. And it starts to spiral that actually the rest of the week, bar a couple of evenings, maybe one or two evenings where we sit down and have a nice glass of wine and a little charcuterie board. The rest of the week is spent me walking on eggshells, her walking on eggshells, and us kind of being ships in the night because I'm working and she's got her life and she's got her routine. And I did this for so many years. And then it was actually my husband who pointed out when I was planning my trip. My husband pointed out, he's like, but you leave your mother's feeling guilty, feeling shamed, feeling like a bad daughter. It's a net negative, Kat. What are you doing? And I was like, but I can't not see her. Then I'm like the ultimate demon daughter. Like, I can't not see her. She's 70. Like, I got to see her. And so it was my own coach who said to me, like, what would it take to have a joyful encounter? And I said, well, in a dream world, she would come down to London. I'd go to London. I'd have my little business meetings. She'd come down to London and we would have 3 days together in a nice hotel. When we go out for meals, we're on neutral ground. We're in a hotel. It's not her space. It's not my space. And we do all the classic mother-daughter things. We go shopping, we hang out, and it's a weekend, so there's no work. And it's this little mini staycation, it's a holiday. And I thought my mum will never agree to that. My mother would think like, oh, it's expensive, blah, blah, blah. How am I going to do it? And so again, my coach was like, but frame it in the most positive light that you can. Frame it from a place of joy and pleasure and excitement. And like, Mum, wouldn't this be amazing if we could do this? Right? Rather than me being in your space, and then you have to cook and clean and all of that. Like, I don't want you to have to go through that. Why don't we do this thing? And maybe I'll pay for some dinners and we'll have this amazing time to connect and paint this really vivid picture. And so I did. I called my mom and I said, I'm going to pitch you something here because, I've been thinking and you work so hard and it's a little bit of manipulation here. Let's be honest, right? A little bit of manipulation. But I painted this really wonderful, vivid picture. And my mom was like, that sounds amazing. I would love to do that. Go find us a nice hotel and look at some galleries. And so that is what we're doing. And same thing with my father. Rather than me schlepping all the way to Ukraine and having, to go blah, 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 he's coming to London, which for him is like great. He gets to have a bit of an adventure, get out. He probably gets to do some business meetings. And I get to stay in one place. I get to stay in London. And at this point in my parents' life, I'm confident as they get older, this luxury will leave me, right? And I will have to go to them. But at this point in time, I'm building up the bank of positive, genuinely joyful memories and experiences so that when the obligation does kick in, which I'm one to believe that, they're going to be there to support my parents, I will. And I can talk more about that, but I'm going to pause there and get your thoughts on that.
No, yeah, that's I wrote it down. What would it take for an experience with my parents to be joyful? I will
Yeah.
have to sit with that one. I don't have
Mm.
an immediate answer, but I genuinely appreciate you depositing that question. I do want to pivot to your line of work more so and like
Mhm.
what you see in the everyday field of coaching executives in their
Yeah.
relationships. And I think the easy, obvious starter question is like, where do you see most people struggle? Like,
Yeah.
what are some of the top 3 demand drivers or trends that you notice that I notice like pattern recognition is in your bio. And so like, what are some of those like top 3
Yeah.
patterns that you come in and you're like, yeah, I've seen this like the back of my hand?
Absolutely. The biggest pattern that I have seen amongst high performers, and I live this pattern myself, is twofold. It's being the hero. So being that responsible, dutiful, good partner, the good husband or the good wife, and self-abandonment. And how that shows up is you do all the right things in life, you climb the ladder, you get to the status with the money, the job, whatever it might be, you get the partner. And of course, because you are talented and you're high performing, you probably make good money. And then before you know it, you're potentially a breadwinner. And then before you know it, you're the one who's figuring everything out. And there is this hero identity that starts to develop that actually has been there since childhood, where you are that one who is just proactive and smart, and you get it all, you understand it all. You're really fast, you're really efficient. You're really good, you're really talented. And that becomes the identity in the relationship. And so with my male clients, that looks like somebody who is devoted to the kids, devoted to the wife, devoted to providing, but not providing in the sense of I'm showing up as the most real and authentic version of me, your father and husband, but devoted in the sense of I've made enough money to provide for the next, I don't know, I had one client tell me like 300 years, like I've done it financially. I've got you the house. I've got you the education. I've got you the lifestyle. I've got you the holidays. I provided. And I show up to the baseball games and I'll go to this wedding with my wife. But internally, it's full on self abandonment. Internally, I actually don't know who I really am anymore. I don't know what my authentic self wants anymore. I don't know what my boundaries are anymore. I don't know what my needs are anymore. I am showing up and I'm doing all these things and I feel hollow and I feel like I'm being denied something in life. I feel kind of sad. And the symptom of that very often in my work is unfortunately infidelity, right? It'll bleed out into whether it's just a crush, whether it's a full on affair, but there's this coworker over here or this client over here who I feel really drawn to, who I feel like I can be my real self with. I can be my authentic self. I don't have that obligation or pressure because actually they don't need me. They're making their own money. And there's no kids and there's more, they're not thinking this consciously, but it's like this person becomes this anchor for freedom, this anchor for, I get to be me again, right? And that's where a lot of the infidelity happens, or it shows up as just depression or anxiety, or I had one female client tell me, just feeling like a pushover in your life every day and walking around being like, I'm just resentful. I'm resentful. I'm resentful that I grind every single day. And like, my husband's not doing anything really, and he doesn't get it. And he's sulking over here, or he wants me to do this and that. No one's seeing how hard I've worked and how bad I'm feeling. It's the self-abandonment pattern. They're the two main trends that I see consistently with high performers. And I guess the third one, I don't see this often because often the people actually don't seek help, but it's feeling really lonely at the top. This kind of idea of, I've come this far, I don't have any friends, I don't know who to trust, and I've disconnected with my partner. We just sit on the couch, scrolling through Instagram, watching TV. There's not much to talk about. So I might as well just go back to the office. I might as well just go and do some work, because at least at work, I have control. I get a good ROI. I can focus. I get to be successful. Whereas at home, it's like I'm sitting with a stranger on the couch who's not even asking me about my day. We're living two separate lives. I'm really lonely. And I see that a lot as well. So they're the main patterns. And I mean, all of these are heartbreaking and understandable as well as how we got there.
So you have clearly you've got more certifications than I even knew, some I didn't even know existed, and
I don't think I've
have
got
clearly
enough.
done.
I'm always like, I need to get more.
No, it's crazy,
I love
and
that.
you've clearly done a ton of retreats and like, for someone, irrespective of what stage they're at in their lives of just consciousness and self-awareness, like, what are the top three things that you would recommend, whether it be practices, whether it be a type of therapy, that you would recommend for someone looking to expand their levels of awareness, of consciousness, of like really just like doing the inner work, if you
Yeah.
will?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Having been that person who does all the therapy, all the modalities, all the coaching, blah, 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 the pieces that I have found to be the most important for personal growth, and really this is actually what I put into my method, is number one, you can talk about the problem all you want. You can talk about your childhood all you want. All of that stuff's a little bit irrelevant. The most important thing is actually, what is the impact it's left on you, and what specifically is the subconscious impact? Meaning, what are the patterns and what are the blocks? I call them subconscious blocks. There's different terms you can use. So step number one for me with anyone is get really good at knowing what are my own unique subconscious blocks. I know what mine are as I'm scaling, right? As I'm scaling my business, because I've never scaled a business. So like I'm seeing these new little things come up, and I know what they were in my relationships. I know what they were in my relationship with my family, and my own personal sense of satisfaction and health. So what are your subconscious blocks? How are they showing up in your life? And how are they getting in the way of your life? All of that is a subconscious question. And when we go to therapy and we do couples counseling, whatever it might be, we talk a lot about the story. We talk a lot about how they're playing out, but we don't actually stop to pinpoint, well, what is the exact block? What is the exact block, right? Abandonment is like just one of them. I'd argue there's well over 30 that you can pick from. So you want to get to know what they are, and you want to know them intimately so that you can spot them in real time. So that every single time you get triggered or upset or feel hurt or feel sad, you can draw back to, what's the wound that's getting activated? What's the block that's getting activated right now? That's the most important thing, because that awareness will help you start to dismantle your identification with it. It'll help you stop feeling so bought into the story and actually start seeing things a little bit more clear. Oh, hold on a second. Maybe I'm projecting something here. Hold on a second. Maybe I'm not seeing this so clearly. So that's step number one. Step number two is learn how to master your subconscious mind. We can all do it. We all have neuroplasticity. You are not doomed to stay the way that you are. And you don't have to just spend forever talking about it. You can, with the right tools, learn to actually, quote unquote, rewire, that's not a technical term, your brain. So if you are someone who recognizes that, hey, I'm actually a bit anxiously attached, or I'm a bit avoidant, you don't have to stay that way. You don't have to. You can absolutely recondition your brain to not be that way, to be secure. And so step number two is learn those tools and techniques. Go find the best teachers, whether it's me or someone else, but go find teachers to show you how to actually take ownership over these blocks so that they don't plague your life, and recondition them so that you can become more secure. And then you want to know what your needs are. And your needs are really important, because everything that you do in your life is actually a bid to get your needs met. Us even talking on this podcast right now is actually both of us on a subconscious level getting our needs met, right? We both have needs that are getting met here. Everything you do is your subconscious trying to get its needs met. the thing is, most people don't know what their needs are. And so they walk around thinking that they're self-sabotaging all the time. They're not self-sabotaging. It's just a subconscious getting your needs met in a way that isn't maybe that effective. So get really clear on what your needs are and start building healthy, proactive strategies to get your needs met so that you're not, quote unquote, self-sabotaging. If you're having a crush on a coworker, that's not self-sabotage, nor does it mean that you need to run off with that person. It's your needs getting met, right? If you're having constant conflicts with your partner, doesn't mean that you're in the wrong relationship. Just means that your needs are trying to get met in a way that's maybe a little bit maladaptive. So understanding your needs is so powerful because it gives you more control and agency to actually find more productive adult ways to get them met. And then the fourth and final piece is learn how to really build a healthy relationship. And that applies to work, that applies to personal dynamics, friendships, family. That looks like having good boundaries. What are boundaries? Learn what yours are and learn to set them really well. That looks like understanding how do you keep intimacy alive after 10, 20, 30 years. That looks like having healthy communication, navigating conflict and being really good at it so that you don't fear it anymore. So you're not conflict avoidant and then getting stuck in situations that aren't good for you long term. Like learning these relational skills that no one ever teaches us. No one ever teaches us in life, right? You don't go to university and learn this. You don't learn this from your parents. You don't learn this at school. You're going to have to learn it, unfortunately, which is, I think that's one of our faults in society. But you can learn it. You absolutely can learn it. And when you've got a hold on your blocks and cleared them out and you know what your needs are, it's going to be that much easier to actually start practicing good communication or good conflict resolution in a way that actually sticks. And so that's what I would say to anyone is, if you want to start with the blocks and work in that order. Don't do what society tells us to do, which is, learn about the communication techniques and think that that's enough, because it's not going to be enough because you're still blocked and you don't know what you're solving for because you don't know what your needs are. There's a logic to the process, right? And I love logic and systems and KPIs and, thinking of things in a very coherent way. And I know it drove me absolutely bananas for, again, over 15 years where I knew all this relational stuff, but I didn't know the other stuff and I couldn't put it all together. And so I did things in the wrong order and then spent forever banging my head against the wall, wondering why nothing was working.
Yeah, I think one of the themes that really jumped out in this entire conversation were even starting from when we talked about the eating disorder and anorexia, and then we started talking about infidelity in the workplace, which, by the way, I just read the stat, 85% of affairs happen or start in the
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah.
So you're onto something there for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right?
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think about like my own personal experience when it's two things that I personally have never been associated with. It's easy to, I think, come across with judgment in terms of what we see at the surface, right? Somebody with anorexia is obviously struggling. But I think growing up, when I first saw somebody very symptomatically struggling with that, it came from a place of judgment of like, oh,
Course,
like
yeah.
what,
Yeah.
what's going on with that person. Um and then when it comes to infidelity, it's just like, oh, this person's a sick animal. Like, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, oh, they
totally,
have no
totally.
control, they have no
Yeah,
morals, like they're
totally.
so low, scum of the
The
earth,
Coldplay
right? Like
concert,
so easy.
Yeah.
Huh?
the Coldplay concert that went
Yeah.
viral. The
Right, yeah,
workplace.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
it just has me thinking, like, I'll focus on the infidelity one because I think it's a little bit easier to
Yeah.
judge that without compassion and to see that and to write that person off entirely. And
Yeah.
whereas you can just see all of the underlying roots of all of this leading up, and not to say that we're excusing the behavior, because I think there
No.
has to be a degree of accountability, but to be able to sit there and to actually understand and see it at a level that's below the tip of the iceberg and say, well, what has led to this? Like, what are the
Yeah.
things that this person is struggling with? They're probably a high performer, or they had some sort of upbringing with their parents. They probably have certain stress triggers, and so to be able to see all that, to be able to recognize all that, I think it's I would one commend the work that you're doing, because I think you help on a preventative side. I think you take
Yeah.
a very preemptive measure that really addresses people at the root of their issue and meets them where they're at with that. And so um, it it's offered me an opportunity to take a step back and make sure that I'm not just judging people. But I am curious, like, how you reconcile that piece of understanding just how much that person could be suffering with also holding them accountable, and where do boundaries come in there, especially if you're the spouse who
Yeah.
is the so-called victim of the affair.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. And I work often with the couples in the aftermath of the infidelity moment, right? So I'll typically work with one person, often the person who is committing the infidelity. I'll help them navigate through that. And then sometimes we might bring in their spouse and I'll work with both of them. I don't find any value in creating more shame in the world. The world is already a horribly shame-ridden, traumatized place, right? Like, you look at what's happening from all the big problems that we have, all the wars, climate change, blah, 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 blah. That's fueled by shame-driven individuals, I would argue, who are very in pain, right? And when I look at things like infidelity, which is so funny, this is when I'm about that kind of Freudian moment of my life, how, my dad cheated and like I've had so much experience with infidelity. It's that whole piece of like, yes, you can be guilty, but not to blame. And often people don't know how to navigate difficult conversations in a relationship. They don't know how to navigate their needs and their confusing feelings. We're not taught any of that. All we're taught is that you're shamed, you're demonized, you're a horrible, bad person, you're the scum of the earth, go to hell, right? Not helpful, because that's only going to fuel more negative behaviors. And so my lens is always compassion, curiosity, understanding, and recognizing that we can all be guilty, but we're not to blame. And so the ownership piece, the accountability piece comes from, whilst you are not to blame necessarily for the patterns that led you here, you are responsible as a sovereign adult with the whole intelligent faculties and everything that you have to improve it, right? To find a way of creating structures in your life that are in integrity. And if that means having an open marriage, great, go do that. But do that from a place of integrity. If that means being polyamorous, great, go do that from a place of integrity. If that means actually cutting off the affair partner or ending your marriage, great, do that. But do it from a place of integrity where you can honestly say that I am being honest to my true self and I am deeply in integrity with who I am and what I stand for and the life that I want to lead. And that is your responsibility as a sovereign adult. We are not children. We can be living the effects of our childhood, but the whole piece of quote unquote healing is to step into our adulthood, examine those patterns and see what is working for me and what isn't. And how can I actually take ownership and kind of level up in that respect, right? So I can see patterns both in my clients, in myself, in my husband, and still have compassion and curiosity and hold people up to a higher standard, believing that I know that you are at your core a good person. I know that you are worthy. I know that you are good enough. I know that you are intelligent. I know that you can figure this out. So what would it take to bring you to that place where you are in integrity? Because from my perspective, that's where you have true freedom. That's where you can relax. That's where you feel secure. That's where life becomes more easeful, when you are in integrity with who you really are, not when you are living a lie based on your childhood patterns and wounding and conditioning and you're very unconscious. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. Living in integrity of who you really are. That's how we're going to wrap up. Katarina, thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time, for your wisdom. I feel like I learned some MD over here as homework, and I might take it back with me too. Just why not?
Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed being here.